Stand. Look, after 2 heavy weeks of pretty intense stuff, this week is pretty light. And I've already been asked if I'm going to print the notes of this thing from last service. I'm sitting here going, seriously? I don't think it's worth having the notes off, but I will make a PDF. It'll be the slides with the note version underneath it. But yeah, I'll try to do that. If you want to get that, you'll be able to get it off the website where you find the sermons and such. So to all those out there in internet land, hello. I still don't like doing it, but right, there we are. Look, we're on week 3 of this series of Anglican is the New Black. What is it to be an Anglican? What is it we actually believe? What is it we're actually doing? Why do we do it that way? And first, let me just tell you, our way is our way, and another movement, tradition, denomination has their way, and there's strengths and weaknesses to all of them. The Baptists have a lot more freedoms and things that ours can be some kind of constraining sometimes, and I get a little bit of envious. But we've got some support structures behind us that help me sleep at night and are very helpful in doing that. So this is our tradition, and hopefully the best of our tradition, and hopefully it'll help give you some clear identity and confidence in being who we are as Anglicans. As a very quick, I'm not getting response. Talk to me. Turning it on helps. There we go. Right. In our first week, we looked at the core of what it is to be an Anglican, and we talked about this compass rose, the compass with the multiple sub-angles and directions, and then the Anglican compass rose with the cross of St. George in the center. These 8 not opposing, but different contrasting values paired with the opposite to it. Orthodox, God's Word is what guides and strengthens us, and we have confidence in the inspired Word of God. But yet, the charismatic side, we are sensitive to the Spirit. We are evangelical. We engage Jesus one-on-one. Each one of us come to Jesus. But we're also Catholic. The body of Christ is what brings Jesus to the world. And you can work your way around that. When you got to the second week, a second week of meat, it was the sacraments. How Israel was to be a people, a sign in how they lived and in what they said and in how they worshiped, a sign. The action speech where words aren't enough and where the most important things in life can't be just communicated in words. Israel was to be that sign to the world, and they weren't always that great at it, but sometimes they were. And likewise, the church sometimes has been very good at it, and in other times we've really stuffed it up. All you had to do was pay attention to the news this week, and yet another mega powerful church leader has brought sadness to the church and has caused real pain to the name of Christ for us. In these sacraments of how we worship and who we are as Anglicans, we have this call that the church should bring the love of God to the world. And we should proclaim that clearly to interpret our actions in our worship and in our life. Now this week, look, you're not going to have to think a lot. There's a lot of people in this service who did not grow up Anglican and may have heard all of these strange words thrown around and not know what they mean. Some of you may have been Anglican your whole life and are like, I had zero idea. That's where that came from. For those of you who are better than I and know all of this stuff, please just endure and not fall asleep. If you do, don't snore. Look, the passages, we had that gospel passage where it talks about James and John and the mother and sitting left and right in the clear turnover of what it is to be a leader in God's church. And Jesus making very clearly that that's not who we're supposed to be as leaders. In the version of the Bible in front of you and in the version read, that word highlighted in yellow was bishop. because it could equally be interpreted, which other translations do, as overseer. And these are important for us to understand about leaders. Some people have said, I think they're crazy, that the Bible says nothing about leadership. And I just kind of pause, and God was constantly engaging leaders. The whole Old Testament narrative of God's people, the prophetic indictment of prophets against leaders. The Gospels are filled with what it is to be a leader in God's idea, not lording over, but facilitating and serving and giving of yourself for the better of all. But there's some key words that we've used that might be helpful and you've heard thrown around. Those words on the left there are the four main words that you see in the offices of the church. And you can see the corresponding word that we get it from. When that passage, 1 Timothy 3:1, gave us overseer or bishop, they didn't think in the office of bishop the way we think of now. The church was in its infancy. But you see those different words used in different ways. One of the main contrasts that I would say is that how this is developed for diakonos, the deacons of the church lead the church out into mission and ministry. There are people who function as deacons who have not been ordained deacons in our church every day. The food pantry effort, working to bring food to St. Ambrose, the book trust, the children's ministry, leading movement in music, whatever that ministry might be, there's people who are focusing us and engaging the community. And there are people who are functioning like pastors, gathering God's people together to grow up into the faith. These terms with time came to have more defined meaning and offices as the church went through its maturing process. Ordination. It's always thought that ordination is this upscaling, and I want you to reverse it, that in its best and biblically, ordination is a downscaling. Every Christian that baptized is called to the ministry and the mission of the church. Go look up the baptismal, grab one of the prayer books in the back and look up the baptismal rite and see what the words that we say and pray over those baptized are called to. Within that, the church discerns those who are called to be ordained. Every bishop and every priest starts in the office of deacon. Deacon means to serve, to minister, to give yourself away. Quite often bishops wear the vestments of a deacon underneath the bishop regalia to remind themselves that first they're a deacon. And then once a person has been ordained a deacon, some stay deacons and are called to remain deacons. And some are called to a further setting aside to serve as a priest. And then I can tell you very specifically, it is a step down in giving yourself away to then be one of the few discerned to be a bishop. One of the confidences that you can have is that we have a clear apostolic succession all the way back to Peter, that every bishop that has ever been discerned and chosen, not always with the best criteria and motivations, but they have been ordained by bishops who can be traced straight back to Peter. When a person is ordained a deacon, if you were to see the two of us walking down the streets, it would look exactly alike. They both can wear collars, they both can wear sweatshirts. But there are only three functions that distinguish a deacon and a priest. It's back to that meaning. The deacon leads the people out into mission. The priest calls the people in to be the body of Christ. And hence those three functions reserved for a priest. Contrasting and comparing the priest and the bishop. I can't ordain anyone. Normally within a diocese, the bishop does confirmations. But there are times and places where the bishop may allow a priest to do a confirmation. It's going to be a long time before he can be with them. The person wants to be confirmed with their body, which I think is a really good idea with their local church, or they're really isolated and remote, such as one of our parishes on the Chatham Islands. But to make a bishop, it requires 3 other bishops to participate and consecrate that person. In the ordination, in that the 3 offices of deacon, priests, and bishops, they can, except for the bishops, except when this is not true, they can serve at multiple levels. Priests and deacons can serve at a diocesan, provincial, or down at a parish level. Normally, once a bishop, you serve at a bishop or provincial level. But I do know priests or bishops who have retired, who've been asked, because of their experience, to go take a church that's in trouble and to lead it for a season. They have the right to forever wear that purple that a bishop wears. But quite often when they step into those roles, because they're first ordained a what? Deacon. They'll return to black and not wear the purple. In this ordination, in this setting aside, my office is priest. My role at this time is vicar. That won't always be the case. That can change, and I serve at the leisure of that bishop. There can be priests and deacons who are not stipended, they're not paid, or they're retired, but they still function. A very experienced and now retired vicar is Eric here. The other 2 priests that are retired priests and still serving as priests are still functioning. We do have a couple of priests in our body who have retired from even serving in this role, but they are priests, and that is priests for life. That doesn't change. Now, in looking at this organization, we're going to start big and go small, and I'll remove a couple of the mysteries of our tradition, and we'll look at those 4 areas on the right. First, we're a global communion. This began, yes, in the Church of England 500 years ago, but it is spread around the world today. Archbishop, 2 crosses instead of 1 used. Archbishop Justin Welby is the primate of the Anglican Communion and also the primate of the Church of England, the first. As primate of the Anglican Communion, he's not an Anglican pope. He doesn't have dictatorial authority over provinces outside the Church of England. Sure, he has influence. Sure, he has experience. Sure, they have chosen really smart people in any of our historical memory, back to some kind of tough centuries, to be the archbishop. He's actually the that was not good. He's actually the Archbishop of Canterbury, one of the dioceses within the Church of England. But he lives at Lambeth. Lambeth is, yes, a palace across the river from Parliament, but it's the office in place, an engine of Justin's influence, not just in the C of E, but in the global communion. Next year, we're going to study the 1 Peter, Peter's first letter to the church. Something that Archbishop Justin Welby started that is very unique. Most of our commentaries are done from a mono perspective of Western English culture. In the 19th century, it was mostly from a Germanic theologian angle. But most of the commentaries, the expertise, the reflections, the unpacking of Scripture is done from a British-American perspective. First world, empire. Archbishop Justin commissioned a team at Lambeth, one of his senior canons, that'll come in a moment, to undertake a study globally, bringing in theologians from every continent and major ethnic group of people around the world, and to look at Scripture differently. Because a theologian in the Middle East or Africa or Asia is going to look at it very differently than a European. And to come together and sort out what God's Word looks like so that we can work on diminishing the impact of the cultural glasses we all wear. That's a great responsibility and contribution that the Archbishop of Canterbury can do. He also hosts every 10 years a conference of every bishop on the planet in the communion at a gathering of bishops called the Lambeth Conference. They don't have voting authority, but they come together, and that's something that makes Anglicans very different, as that we come together and we try to find a way to, in deference and partnership, work together to move forward, not dictated down with an edict ex cathedra from the chair of a pope or a bishop. Now, the global communion is divided into provinces. The Church of England, the Church of Scotland, Church of Canada, Church of the United States, and even though we're smaller and less population, there is the Church of Australia and the Church of New Zealand. These provincial provinces, now New Zealand is New Zealand and Polynesia, but they're defined by these geographic regions to subdivide. When you come to places like Africa, Europe, Asia, they tend to be one province for that whole continent because there's not as many of us in those spaces. Europe is actually under the Church of England because there's only a few capitals where there are Anglican churches, and they're best administered, led, resourced from England. We had a friend who was in one of the Caribbean islands as a vicar under the Queen. But as a British colonial territory, it was a long way to London. So, because of the geography, they were actually assigned to the province of Canada to administer it. So these geographical provinces basically gives everybody a family, no orphans to belong to. When it comes to understanding the rule or the rule within the Church of England that the sovereign, whoever that is the head of the church, that doesn't apply to the other provinces around the world. In the Church of England, not the Church of Scotland, just the Church of England, not the Church of Wales, just England, the sovereign is the head of the church. Now, a lot of people, why does that happen? I get the criticisms. But there are a few strengths and advantages. The monarch outlasts whoever the bishop powers are of the day, and can minimize the swings and influences of trying to take the church this direction or trying to take the church that direction. As part of where the sovereign is the sovereign, and there is the House of Lords, people of peerage who sit in there, there are certain bishops that belong to the House of Lords and have a prophetic presence and voice into the civil government. Matters of life, matters of justice, matters of mercy, matters of that's not a just war, and we speak against that. And there's only certain bishops, certainly not every bishop in the Church of England is a part of the House of Lords. In our orders of worship, yes, we pray for the sovereign, but the sovereign is not the head of the Church of New Zealand or Australia But in these provinces, the power of how we worship and what we do and what's allowed and not allowed happens at a provincial level. And I'll unpack what that looks like. Our province is very unique on the planet. No other province on the world has done that. It's had some strengths and it's had some weaknesses. In the early 80s, when they took our province and they divided it into 3 strands. A Polynesian strand, a Maori strand, and a Pakeha strand. You can see the numbers of dioceses there. Now, that was good, and I understand the intent in the partnership and the recognition of that, and that is the strength. The downside of that is having the expertise and the resources, and even in the partnership, some of the resources that, say, the Pakeha Church can generate fiscally, that the province of Polynesia, or the Tikanga of Polynesia, doesn't have the resources to do. So there are strengths and weaknesses to each of those. Our diocese, and I'm going to narrow it now to the Pakeha diocese, to which we belong, to the Tikanga of Pakeha, is normally titled by the major city in that diocese, except when it's not. When it's a more rural diocese, they will call it by the region. It's not the Diocese of Napier, it's the Diocese of Waiapu. It's not the Diocese of New Plymouth, it's the Diocese of Taranaki. These lines can change and combinations can take place. Waikato and Taranaki were once two separate dioceses, but the post-war industrialization of rural New Zealand, America, etc., caused less people to live in those rural areas as people moved to the cities. So these two dioceses basically weren't sustainable independently, so they became one diocese. Our diocese goes from the west coast, about midway up the west coast, down to just this side of Lake Tekapo, down to Timaru, where Josh, a young priest from here, is now the vicar, and over to and including the Chatham Islands. 60-something parishes plus a whole slew of ministry units. A ministry unit could be some fresh expression that you're trying to define how do we reach this people group, be it just a subculture within a society or an ethnic group. The Chinese Anglican mission in Wellington has been successful for well over 100 years, doing ministry in and amongst the Chinese, significant Chinese subculture there. But military chaplains, hospital chaplains, our Anglican schools, seafarers, city mission, all of these are ministry units within a diocese. At the province and at the diocese level, there are these congresses, conferences where people come and confer, where these are family reunions where the family comes together and sends representatives from across that diocese to meet together and speak and make decisions. Right up front, the weight of influence in decisions and voting is by the parishes and not the ministry units, because the ministry units have a voice, have representation, but they're a very narrow presence in the diocese, and the majority of the diocese are these parishes. It's where we celebrate one another, we hear one another, we hear what's important, we hear what's bothering us, and we work through problems together. It's where we plan and dream together. And so when a parish decides these are going to be our synod reps, yes, they're there to represent a parish, but they're there to think on behalf and make the best decisions for the entire diocese or province. A synod is composed of three houses, three colleges: the College of Bishops, the College of Clergy, and the College of Laity. No canon or new statute can pass unless it passes all three houses. Now, in our diocese, we have one bishop. That's how a bishop prevents a diocese from kind of losing the plot. That's also how a diocese prevents a bishop from losing the plot. And there's certain divisions of what a bishop can do in administering and leading a diocese, which is quite broad. But there's also things that are reserved for the family to decide, and no rule can be changed. Our order of worship and how we worship, what we say and don't say, cannot be changed by me or any priest in this parish. It cannot be changed by Bishop Peter. That has to be decided at the provincial level to order and guard, because what could happen was you could have some priest who has a pogo stick, a hobby horse that he or she wants to ride, and they can move and change and take that church into absolutely heresy. And so these orders are there to keep us, yes, charismatic, listening to the Spirit, but yes, orthodox, rooted in God's Word. This takes place normally in a very collegial atmosphere. Now, it's College of Bishops because there are dioceses, and obviously provinces have more than one bishop. When synod, which meets once a year, General Synod or Diocesan Synod, our congresses, there are standing committees that function. Within the synod of the diocese, they will choose a certain number of people of certain colleges to go represent the diocese at the provincial level. A certain number of lay, a certain number of ordained, and the bishops of that diocese will be a part of General Synod. But in between when these synods meet, there is a standing committee, synod outside of synod meeting as a whole, where we entrust members of the diocesan synod to stand and meet and make decisions. They can't make any decision, but there is a breadth of decisions they can make, authority they've been given by the General Synod, by the family, that they can handle these issues when synod's not in session. In our church, we have Kirsty May, who is a member not just of being one of our parish synod reps, but being part of the standing committee for our diocesan synod the other 11 and a half months of the year. Here's something that we need to really get to understand our family and how we're organized. Our diocese, every diocese, has a board of trustees. A board of trustees, as the attorneys in the room will testify, is to hold in trust the assets, whatever they might be, for that entity. So that board of trustees holds in trust for the entire diocese all of the assets of that diocese. And they have fiduciary legal responsibility and culpability for how they manage or fail to manage that. So when a church says they didn't make the decision we wanted, it's because that board of trustees is trying to think not just now in 2020 and not just for that individual parish. They're trying to think of the entire diocese and its best, not just today, but 10, 20, 30, 40 years into the future. Leading a diocese is a bishop. At one time, that bishop was the only pastor to that people. At one time, there was one bishop in New Zealand. Some of the most famous buildings and streets and squares in the country are named after some of those first leaders. As the church in New Zealand grew, that bishop had priests that came to assist him, and now today him or her, and began to appoint these pastors to help them lead the diocese. As the diocese got bigger, that bishop became an archbishop with dividing bishops underneath them, these subunits, as it became more and more complex. Within a diocese, every piece of dirt of that diocese is divided into a parish, an area of spiritual responsibility to lead the church and to engage those people with the hope of Jesus. These subunits are priests, my office, the position is vicar. Vicar is the very same word we get vicarious. So, my role as a vicar is to be the bishop who is the pastor of the diocese and responsible for the care of all the people, is to be an extension, a continuation, an outgoing, a localization, a vicarious presence of the bishop in this place. So, my role is not to fight for the bishop and advocate for the parish. My role is to love and lead this parish as an extension from our bishop. Every parish will have a vicar, except when they don't. You had Susan for about 8 months last year. Susan was here to help lead and care for this church in between vicars at a very important time in this church's history. There are times when a bishop will appoint a priest in charge for 3 years until that place can be brought to a place of health where it can have a vicar to carry it forward for a longer period of time. A vicar serves at the leisure of the bishop. If I don't fit for where he's trying to go, he can move me tomorrow. He can give me no assignment tomorrow. He needs priests. He's not going to go around ruining the trust of everybody by getting rid of all his priests. In the same respect, the assistant or retired associate priests that work within a parish serve to help that vicar, who's the one responsible for that parish, do the ministry of that parish. In a church the size of ours with the multiple congregations and the normal amount of people we have here, I could not do this parish alone. I've had a parish with about 35 people on a weekend, about 50 to 60 total. One priest can manage that. But a church with hundreds of people, I couldn't do it on my own. Yes, they serve under me, and I don't have to ask permission to say, you're not really fitting on the team, our oars are banging. I've had to do that before. But they're as much a treasured part of this parish as I am, and I hope they stay and keep helping do that. Now, parishes themselves. There are times when parishes can combine, and there's times when parishes can multiply, give birth. After the quakes, several parishes in the east of Christchurch combined into one or two parishes. Now, 10 years later, the resettlement, the regrowth of that area of the city, one of these parishes is giving birth. One of the churches of that parish are going to another parish, and they're going to join so that parish will have more than one church. One of the churches within that parish is to become a parish in its own right. So these changes do take place, but all of that stuff's decided by the family at Synod. Let me see. Okay. Within a diocese, to have 60-something parishes would be quite the ants running around the place and no help leading. So the Exodus 18 Jethro effect comes into play, where bishops began dividing their diocese into a subset called archdeaconries, which again is another geographic division. Ours goes from St. Peter's at Upper Riccarton up to the area, not including Belfast, but everything this side of that, out to Darfield. And that's our archdeaconry, about 12 parishes. The archdeacon is an assistant to the bishop. And sure, a senior priest who carries influence. But it's not a hierarchical. Again, something very different than our sisters and brothers in the Catholic Church. I don't work for the archdeacon. I listen to him. He's got a lot of experience. He's a very kind guy, and his posture is to help us be successful as an archdeaconry. But I don't work there. I don't work for him. When you have large archdeaconries, the archdeacon won't be vicar of a parish. They'll just be an archdeacon. A friend of mine in England has 80-something parishes in his archdeaconry. That's all he does is archdeacon. And he does everything except hold synod that a bishop does in managing that many parishes. A large archdeaconry like that will have deaneries within it. Our archdeaconries are really about the size of deaneries, because a dean of a deanery is normally a vicar also. We're small here, so our archdeacons are also vicars as well. Is that making sense? Yeah, all right. It's kind of all these funny words. A small diocese like Nelson won't even have archdeaconries. They'll just have deaneries. The whole diocese of Nelson has 4 deaneries. None of them have more than 6 or 7 parishes in each of them. And their deans are also vicars. So you get this global, provincial, diocese, archdeaconries, down to the parish level, which is where we fit in. The diocese is funny. I needed to throw something in there that didn't fit anywhere, so I'll address it here. You probably heard this term curate. Curate comes from the Latin word cure, the same word we get care from. A vicar has the cure of a parish area. This is very different than a Baptist or a vineyard. They are responsible for their congregations and, yes, to do mission into their area. But because of our geographic division, pastoral, spiritual oversight, as the vicar of Avonhead, I have the responsibility for everybody in the Avonhead suburb and this side of Ilam. It's all part of our cure, our care. But with time, they began to call brand new priests, I'll spare you the history, they began to call brand new priests curates. They were learning to care. They've had all of the training, they've had all of the preparation professionally, but there's so many nuances and complexities of how you lead a church in a parish. And I can tell you, having been outside the Anglicans and inside the Anglicans, it's more complex inside. And so curates actually need that. They're normally assigned to a senior priest in a larger church where they can be utilized and be an asset to that. And somebody pays most of the bill, and you don't have to for those 3 years. I can't wait till Bishop Peter can give us a curate. Every diocese will have one cathedral, except when they don't. But most dioceses have one cathedral, and it's in that principal city. That cathedral is the mother church of the diocese. In England, they actually were the first churches of those dioceses. Ours is, we evolved differently with time and history. This one mother church is normally large, where you can gather all of the dioceses together to worship. Now, obviously, everybody doesn't come, but you get it. In those cathedrals, this is where the bishop's seat, his cathedra, sits, his main chair. That's his place from which he leads the entire diocese. But bishops are hardly ever there, so they have deans assigned to lead that cathedral in assistance, other senior priests called canons. And they have a role across all of that diocese as well as in that cathedral. Some have more than one cathedral, and we have one of those situations in New Zealand. When Taranaki and Waikato became one diocese, again, this is very Anglican. You don't want to dishonor one province over the other. That's not the Kiwi way. You don't say, look, New Plymouth, you're out there on the coast. Hamilton's a bigger city. That's where the cathedral's going to be. Your cathedral's no longer a cathedral. That's just not how to care for your people. So that diocese actually has a cathedral in Taranaki and a cathedral in Hamilton. Large archdeaconries often have a minster church, York Minster, Westminster. These large churches kind of perform like smaller area, small cathedrals, junior cathedrals for that area. A great example would be the church in Masterton, St. Matthew's, which is the largest church in the whole archdeaconry of about 17 churches, about 5 parishes. And this one church is the place where that whole archdeaconry can gather together for special events. Here's a big difference. That building by the airport, attractive modern post-quake building, that's not the diocese. That's the Anglican Center. It's the center offices and functions of the diocese, but it's not the diocese. You're the diocese. We're the diocese. The saints gathering this morning on Chatham Islands, the saints on the West Coast, the saints at the cathedral, the saints at St. Peter's, the saints out at Darfield, that's the diocese. The diocese isn't the bishop. The diocese isn't the Anglican Center staff. We are the diocese. Hence the ideas of synods, etc. Now, the bishop has staff to help them lead and administer that diocese. They usually have 2 archdeacon level roles, and these people are generally full-time in that role, an archdeacon of ministry and an archdeacon of mission. We call ours ministry educator, etc. We have some different names, but that's their functions. Stephanie, the ministry educator, is a senior experienced priest who understands how to help resource and fuel training and equipping and encouraging the diocese. But something that's very Anglican, different from our sisters and brothers in the Catholic Church. The Anglican Church, back to its Celtic root, has always empowered every baptized saint to be a part of the ministry of the church. Most of the people who work at the Anglican Center, work out from the Anglican Center, are not priests. Sammy and Emma, who are the Anglican Youth Coordinator and the Children and Family Coordinator, are not priests, they're lay people. Paul Heglum, who helps coach and develop younger leaders, is not a priest. They do have some priestly roles like the ordinand coordinator, the people who are discerning ordination, or the people who lead potty training. The brand new priests, that continuing education and development that they need. But look, sometime we need to understand why it's important that we have a diocese and what they give to us and serve us that you don't get in other dissident, low church, independent forms of being the church. We have Anglican studies with Theology House. We have HR and payroll and financial management, investments and insurance and maintenance expertise and compliance expertise. And we have lawyers called chancellors and assistant chancellors which help keep the bishop out of orange. His color is purple, not orange. But they also help interpret our canons, our statutes of how we govern and lead ourselves. And you need to understand that everybody that are in these roles are you set aside to function in those roles. They're members of parishes right now. The chancellor will be at a church this morning. The AYM leader will be in a parish this morning. They're all part of us and one of us. That senior staff who help, they help with some of these things that help support us and do things, all of us together, all of the parishes together, that we couldn't do on ourselves. City mission could not happen without somebody leading it, because City Mission is an Anglican ministry mission unit that is fueled by all of the parishes of the diocese. Now, larger dioceses have assistant bishops. Wellington has 2, Auckland has 2. Really large archdioceses, such as Oxfordshire or Sydney, will have archbishops over just that diocese, and they will have assistant bishops under them. Oxfordshire has over 800 parishes in that diocese, over 1,200, 1,300 churches. That's way too much for one bishop to oversee. So those archdioceses are subdivided with suffragan bishops covering 200 or so parishes each as assistant bishops. And that's the case in Sydney as well. Some of the advantages in this structure is that there is support, and not just from the experts who work at the Anglican Center. You may not have known this, but Eric was being loaned to another parish in our diocese, not even our archdeaconry, for at least a year? Was it?
2 lots of 3 years.
2 lots of 3 years. So he was still a part of this parish, still functioning in some of the roles, but was quite often up at another one of these parishes helping lead and provide it stability when they needed the priestly support. The best of what it is to be Anglican is when a church is in real need and all of the family comes together to help take care of that parish. That could be people, or that could be money. That's when some of all these churches that were damaged by the earthquake, it was the diocese who helped that parish get back on its feet. And you have to understand why that's important. The bishop is responsible for the ministry and mission of this diocese. And when one of the children, one of the members of the family, this parish, is in trouble, it's all of us who have to help, because if that church goes away, there's a hole in our ministry and mission cover. Not just for 2020, but 2030 and 40 and 50. So we go together. All boats rise on the tide, not just some. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And that's the concept of a diocese and a great strength for ours. A lot of the momentum and impact of mission happens through a diocese when it can't happen by individual parishes. City Mission, our support of the Barnabas Fund, churches in areas that are threatened, our support of CMS, all comes out of some of that contribution that we make as a parish to our diocese that goes on to fuel mission and ministry. But some of this support here in that last line is very, very important, and I'll give you one here. Or a couple here. We get more affordable insurance, we get a better return on our investments, and we have these relationships where we can turn to one another and seek expertise. The Charities Commission recognizes our diocese as this entity, and they help lead and administer within this area and managing funds. One of the great advantages is all payroll in our diocese is served us through the Diocese Anglican Center. The lady who does payroll there has a breadth of people she has to care for that is as big as everybody who works at the Christchurch Airport. The subdivision, as we've said, is the parish, that localized gathering. It's normally named by an area. We're the parish of Avonhead. But a parish can have more than one church. In Masterton, I had 4. It wasn't the parish of St. Matthew's or St. Andrew's or St. Francis, etc. It is the parish named by that area. Again, because it's a geographic. We just happen to be a parish with one church. And all the churches tend to have a saint name or Trinity or something like that, or the Good Shepherd, one of those type names. Sometimes parishes can combine and collapse, as we mentioned. Parishes have an equivalent governance to synod, or a subset type thing called a vestry, where the parish chooses people to serve in specific roles. One of those positions is appointed by a vicar, and that is the vicar's warden. All the rest are elected. And we have wardens and vestry members who do an absolute fantastic job. Some parishes have more than others. That's normally dictated by size. And that vestry includes elected people who are elected to synod. Now, in some dioceses, they're going, wait, we're choosing people to represent us to synod for 3 years, but we're electing vestry every year. That's not making sense. Wellington recently went from 1 year to 2 year terms on vestry. I actually think it should be 3. But again, I'm not over synod and don't get to choose any of that. But this idea that they are helping lead the church. In some places where it's not our best, vestry members are elected to be my subgroup's representative lobbyists for my agenda. That's a very unhealthy, un-Anglican way of looking at a role on a vestry. A vestry is a community of disciples who disciple the community. They're helping lead and do ministry, and they are doing what's best for all of the parish, not just one subgroup. I'll give you an example when it's unhealthy. If you had a vestry that the majority of that parish was older and they only elected older members to the vestry, and those older members only made decisions that ministered to older people, and they never resourced the things for children and younger people in that church. One, that church has a number of days before it's done, and it's not a posture of unifying and discipling the whole community. Anything new there? These vestry members all lead in our parish and have very specific roles. Vilna does nothing but work on grants. Mike Gilmartin focuses on maintenance. Kirsty May brings this legal knowledge and things that keep us out of trouble and help us from doing things that are not legal or wise or ethically appropriate. They also have a lot of soft roles in there. To listen, to unite, to positively rumor. Because human beings tend to normally be a little bit on the negative side. Never would happen here. But they will know more what's going on and why we're doing what we're doing. Here would be a common one. All you're doing is giving all the energy and money and people to children and youth and young adults. To which one of our vestry members would go, 2 of the 3 services are really oriented towards older people, and 3 of the 4 priests are focused solely on the older members. And we have this ministry and this ministry and this ministry, and we just started Movement in Music, which is now a permanent ministry, and it's been very successful, and it's really targeting older people. They would be able to give that perspective and help people go, oh, another one that's going on. I'll talk about it at the AGM. Is that people are saying, if we're getting all these grants and trusts, why are we still in deficit? And a vestry member could explain, well, the deficit is what we've budgeted and must have pay the bills, the WAF, salaries, ministry budgets, and things like that. Everything that we're doing grants and trusts for are new mission initiatives to get the church back on a good, healthy footing, going the right direction. And all of the money for that is not coming out of the budget, but has been garnered from outside. So the grants and trusts that we get are not actually impacting the budget. You get that difference, how they're able to explain some of that stuff? Why? Because you're never going to come ask me. You're going to go ask somebody you know on vestry. We have an AGM, a mirror of synod, where we as a church come together and make some decisions. And we address issues. And we get direction. And you build trust in the vestry that's leading you. And we decide who's on that vestry. There's an old school mindset that synods and AGMs should be adversarial. When Wellington had that culture, and Bishop Justin worked on changing it so that it was positive, people started loving going to synod. And there were meals and cheering and encouraging and hearing the good things that are going on. You had a few people who were part of that old school who didn't think it was a proper synod because people weren't fighting and storming out of the room and throwing books down and having family fights. And it's like, you're just telling me that dysfunction was normalized. And there are parishes where that's been the case. Where AGMs were these ugly throwdowns and an opportunity to throw a torpedo that a warden or a vicar didn't see coming, rather than in a healthy way addressing an issue or a problem offline before and giving them the opportunity to settle it. Fortunately, in most churches, that's going away. In your church, you've got a vicar, assistant priests, you've got ministers who work in different specific areas, and you have administrative staff, Joanna, Barbara, and Michael S., who does our building and facility care. But Joanna and Barbara also carry real ministry, pastoral areas that they function in as part of our church. And the members of your vestry all have those specific areas, and I commend them to you as we consider them Thursday at AGM. I do want to praise you with these two things. As a church, a local area parish, part of an archdeaconry, part of a diocese, part of a province, part of the global communion, we're actually a very rare church in that we have 50% of our parish is involved in some form of the ministry and mission of this church. Normally, that's 10 to 20%. We have a great advantage of being a church where there's so many people who own what we're doing and where we're going. And as a result, because of the partnership, a very Anglican posture, not a dictatorial rule, we are seeing our church rebound and grow and get healthy and expand. In fact, I think this is the first day in months, where the 9 o'clock service was larger than the 10:30 service. Normally, this service has grown to be much larger, and the energy, you can feel it in the room. So we are going forward, and that's it. Whew. Next week, we're going to look at our service and why we do some of the things we do. And then at 5, at 6, what we believe in our mission as Anglicans. So it was a lot of stuff, but it wasn't any theological rending topics. So thanks. I hope it gives you a little more understanding.